All right, you modern humans. In this video, we cover David Lloyd George and the start of his efforts to castrate the House of Lords' power. This is Speaking Through the Ages, where we bring back the dead in an attempt to bring out the values, beliefs, and internal struggles of those humans that came before. We give context to and deliver historical speeches that motivated people to kill, riot, make salt, and sign papers. I'm Joseph Delisle, your novice history fan. To join us, subscribe and click the bell for notifications. Now, the third greatest British Prime Minister of all time. British parliamentary history is the story of how the people accrued power. It describes the swing of power from monarch to nobility, from nobility to elected officials. Before 1911, the House of Commons, elected officials, was more or less equal with the House of Lords, non-elected officials. The House of Lords descended from the Great Council, advisors to the king during medieval times. Historically, it included the nobility and landed gentry. Today, hereditary positions are limited to about 90 members out of about 800-ish. The rest are primarily appointed based on experience or life achievement. The rise of House of Commons expanded from medieval times to modern times. By the mid-1800s, its power increased exponentially through various reforms, some of which we have mentioned before. However, before 1911, the House of Lords still had veto power. David Lloyd George, with his powerful rhetoric, ignited a chain of events that altered the House of Lords, altered their status throughout the 20th century. He went on to be the final liberal prime minister of the United Kingdom, but also one of the most famous. He was voted as the third greatest British prime minister of the 20th century in a poll of 139 academics and was named among the 100 greatest Britons in a UK-wide vote in 2002. He was the only Welsh-born prime minister and spoke English as a second language. Born January 17, 1863, to Welsh parents, his upbringing was a mix of upper and lower class. His father, William George, died of pneumonia at the age of 44. He left a widowed wife, forcing her to sell the farm and move the family to a cottage known as Highgate with her brother, Richard Lloyd, a liberal shoemaker. Richard Lloyd was very influential even up to his death in 1917. David Lloyd George appended Lloyd to his surname to become, well, David Lloyd George. Throughout his time in politics, he struck a chord with the common man as being a common man. But the truth is, his uncle made his upbringing more upper class than lower. Regardless, he became the people's champion. I guess agendas and politics are all really just narration. But I digress. David Lloyd George was educated at a local Anglican school. Despite being brought up a devout evangelical, he morphed into something like a deist or agnostic. Throughout his education, he became deeply interested in land ownership and books written by individuals associated with democratic socialism. One of his favorite books was called Progress and Poverty by Henry George, an American philosopher who was responsible for founding Georgism, which is kind of half capitalism, half socialism. Georgism is structured around the belief that people should own the value they produce themselves, but the economic value derived from land, including natural resources, should belong equally to all members of society. This was a great influence on the people's budget, but more on that in a second. Lloyd George went on to practice law as a solicitor in 1884. He posted up in the back parlor of his uncle's house and accepted his brother as a partner in 1887. His practice flourished. Lloyd George was the only solicitor to have been prime minister. All others were the more prestigious barristers. Joseph Chamberlain's anti-establishment reforms and radicalism inspired Lloyd George. The Third Reform Act of 1884 was followed by the Redistribution Act in 1885, in which Joseph Chamberlain echoed the 3 acres and a cow slogan, spoke of land redistribution, rallied for direct taxation, demanded free education, supported the de-establishment of the Church of England, and pushed for trade union protection. All of this activated Lloyd George's political loyalties for the Liberal Party. In 1888, there were several significant events. After a long period of womanizing, he finally married the daughter from a well-to-do local farming family on January 24th. Lloyd George was incapable of controlling his sexual appetite, and his affairs became notorious. Margaret was tolerant, as all good women were expected to be at the time, but in the end, it was too much, even for her. During the same year of his not-so-happy marriage, David Lloyd George founded the newspaper Udgorn Rhydid, which is Welsh for Bugle of Freedom. In addition, he won an appeal to the Divisional Court of Queen's Bench for the Llanthrothn burial case. This famous case established the rights of Protestants who did not conform to the governance and usage of the Church of England to be buried where they wished. This was a right given by the Burial Law Amendment Act of 1880, but was ignored by the Anglican clergy. His writing in the Udgorn and his arguments for the case were hailed throughout Wales. Ultimately, this set him up as the Liberal candidate for the Carnarvon boroughs. Due to the death of the Conservative member Edmund Sweetenham, he won in a by-election in 1890 by 18 votes. He remained in that constituency for 55 years until 1945. Throughout his time as a member of Parliament, he fought for disestablishing and disendowing the Church of England in Wales, temperance reform, and Welsh home rule. For his opposition against the First Boer War, he was wrongly accused of being a little Englander. But he wasn't against the British Empire entirely. He believed it should be founded in freedom for all, including its colonies, instead of racial arrogance. He later gained national fame alongside Henry Campbell-Bannerman for his stark opposition against the Second Boer War. Surprisingly, David Lloyd George was also opposed to the Education Act of 1902 because it supported local funding for Church of England schools, which represented the religious enemy. His opposition and success in opposition gave him a strong parliamentary reputation and flagged him as a potential cabinet member. Sir Henry Campbell-Bannerman, leader of the Liberal Party, became Prime Minister in 1905. He selected David Lloyd George as the President of the Board of Trade. As a cabinet member, he introduced laws on merchant shipping and railway regulations, and he brokered an agreement between union and railway companies. But soon, Campbell-Bannerman died, and H.S. Asquith, another Liberal leader, replaced him. This left the Chancellor of Exchequer vacant. Asquith filled that post with, you guessed it, Lloyd George, who was then responsible for all economic and financial matters. Both Lloyd George and Asquith served in these positions from 1908 to 1915. This allowed Lloyd George to gain enough influence and power to release his controversial budget plan, the People's Budget. The budget was introduced in 1909, and according to Brian MacArthur, the editor of the Penguin Book of Modern Speeches, it proposed, quote, a modest supertax on the very rich, and new taxes on land. Its aim was to wage implacable warfare against poverty and squalor, unquote. There were taxes on undeveloped land and minerals, increased death duties, and a rise in income taxes. There were taxes on luxuries like alcohol and tobacco, all designed to fund the new old age pension plan and intense naval construction. This budget hit the big landowners square in the mouth. Unfortunately for Lloyd George, most of them were sitting in the upper chamber of Parliament, and they threw the bill out instantly. Lloyd George launched a full-scale defense of his budget in front of a crowd of 4,000 at Edinburgh Castle. It is this defense, this speech, that we'll be delivering in our next video. It was this speech that pissed off King Edward VII, who said it was designed as, quote, to set class against class and to inflame the passions of the working and lower orders against people who happen to be owners of property, unquote. The campaign Lloyd George launched eventually led to the Parliamentary Act of 1911. That put the final stake in hereditary rule and transferred power to the lower class. It stripped the upper chamber of its right to veto. Thanks for exploring the ages with us. In this video, we covered David Lloyd George's political and personal background. Throughout speaking through the ages, we'll encounter different people, cultures, and histories. We'll cover more detail and reveal little by little as each speech requires. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And remember, if you like this video, be sure to light up that subscribe button and click the bell for notifications. Or leave comments to correct any errors, exaggerations, or perfunctory explanations this novice history fan gets wrong. See you next time, where the dead teach.